Awesome. Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Rory Stewart. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. I will now turn it over to Ariana to get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Like she said, my name is Ariana Raleigh, and I am in my last semester here at the U, earning a double bachelor's in criminology and forensic psychology. And just to give you a little backstory of how this discussion panel came to be is since transferring the past 2 years, I started to realize when I started to let other students know my background and experience in cold case work, that there was this need and desire for students to kind of help navigate the landscape of what exactly they can do with their degree or what areas or field positions that would work best for them. And so to give you a little bit about my experience is for the past 5 years, I've been a cold case leader with the Cold Case Coalition, which is a nonprofit here in Utah. And basically we take cold cases and we help law enforcement and victims, loved ones, or family members take everything in the case and our own research that we do and condense it down to like a 10, 15 page report so that we can help law enforcement or victims' loved ones kind of help the case move forward or see if what can there be done or what has been done or hasn't been done. And then I've also for the past 9 months been a cold case intern with the Cold Case Foundation. And then I've been a survivor advocate intern with the Utah Survivors of Homicide, which one of our experts on the panel today. She's my supervisor and mentor So I just wanted to give students the opportunity to understand how and the ways that they can use their degree. And maybe even if this isn't something that your degree specializes in, you can still get involved. And that there's really no clear-cut path or blueprint on how to do this. So I started talking to my career coach, and we decided to collaborate with the U Career Success Center and develop a expert panel because I feel like the opportunity to learn and hear from experts in the field and professionals, which both of them are individuals I've personally worked with or saw something or believed in me even though I didn't have a degree or I wasn't quite yet experienced or professional. So I want students to know that even though you don't have your degree yet, there's still an area and an avenue for you to get experience. So thank you both so much for being here. It's a privilege and an honor, and I'm gonna go ahead and pass this along to Amy.
Sounds good, I'm all right. Perfect. Okay, well, I'm Amy Whitaker with U Career Success. We have a few of your career coaches here as well. And I would just want to start by introducing our panelists, starting with Aubrey Davis. Aubrey Davis is an attorney with Utah Homicide Survivors. And that is a nonprofit firm that supports families of homicide victims as they navigate the legal system after the loss of a loved one. Aubrey has spent her career working with within the Utah criminal justice system. She would say she started when she was a baby. When she was actually just 19 years old, she started as a dispatch worker. She went on to serve as a judicial assistant within the courts. And then after attending law school, she returned to Utah to continue advocating for victims and families. Her work focuses mainly on helping survivors understand their rights, find answers, and move forward during a time of unimaginable loss. So thank you for being here. Detective Ben Pender joins us. He is a veteran investigator with the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office. He leads the countywide cold case unit. We'll talk more about that. With more than 30 years in law enforcement, Detective Pender has worked patrol, traffic, narcotics, task force investigations, homicide, and homicide cold cases now. He's helped solve or advance numerous long-standing unsolved cases and is known for his persistence and commitment to victims' families. In 2022, Detective Pender received the U.S. Department of Justice Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service in Community Policing for his work on solving these long-standing cases. So thank you for being here. First, I wanted to ask if you, and I'll look at Detective Pender on this one, can you define a cold case? What makes a case cold?
Yeah, actually, the term cold case is kind of going out of style, I guess is the best way to put it. They're really unsolved cases, and there's a lot of different ideas when that case goes, I guess you would refer to it as cold still, but kind of gets not worked, and that's really when it becomes that. So it kind of varies in time. It could be anywhere from a year after the case occurred to maybe 10 years or so after the case occurred. And really the thing we're looking for is the case being worked? If it's being worked, then it's not considered a cold case. If we have detectives still actively pursuing different things on it, like testing or interviews or anything to do with the case, that case is considered to be an open case. So we really don't have, at least at the sheriff's office, I don't have any cases that are just sitting with absolutely nothing happening on them. All the cases that I have, they are open, and I am working those cases. It's just they're in a lot of various stages. So it just kind of depends. But once a case, a detective either transfers out of the unit or maybe gets promoted or retires, that case then may be transferred over to me. However, I've seen where other detectives have picked the case up and wanted to work it, so which is great. So I just allow them to continue investigating that type of case because I've got enough of my own as well to work on. So if we have people that are able to do it, we would continue to do that. So that's really how that case would end up essentially being cold per se, is when it's no longer being worked and we've exhausted everything on that case that we can think to do at this time, and it's just kind of sitting there waiting to see what we could possibly do in the future.
Okay. What are some of the biggest, and this is for both of you, what are the biggest investigative, evidentiary, or human challenges in working these types of cases compared to something that's a very active investigation? That was a mouthful. I can repeat if you want.
I would say setting expectations. It doesn't happen like you see on TV. It's not all solved within an hour. They don't have all these high-tech everything, like we're going to get to the bottom of this right now. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes there's no answers. So setting expectations at the beginning and regularly is super important because, that trauma brain, when somebody goes through a traumatic experience, they're only going to process a piece of what you're saying. So you're going to have these same conversations over and over, and maybe in a somewhat different way where they can understand it. So just continually setting those expectations, I think, will help them stay in it for the long run.
Yeah, I would say to that, the difference for us, anyway, for me in that area would be just the fact that we have a lot of witnesses that are deceased right now. We have a lot of witnesses that are out of state, so we have to travel out of state. And evidence that they collected, actually, I've always been really surprised the evidence that they collected back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, because even then when they collected some of the evidence, I'm sure they had no idea why they were collecting it, but they did, which is great for us today because a lot of the technology's changed. So I would say for us, the advancement in forensics has made a huge difference for us, but compared to an active case today, most people have like the doorbell rings, their surveillance cameras, people have cameras on their houses and businesses. That stuff's all over the place, and back then we didn't have that. So today, that's always a challenge. The other challenge that I run into is a lot of the detectives that worked these cases before have passed away as well. So it's kind of hard to go back and try to talk to them, and even the ones that are still around, they had a lot of cases and it's been a lot of years, so a lot of them don't really recall a lot of that detailed information that I may be looking for.
Quick follow-up, because you've mentioned it, so I'm going to ask, how has the forensic technology changed the way you operate within these cold cases? And how they're approached, over 10, 20 years ago?
Yeah, the way I approach a cold case with the forensics is I actually have really fostered a really good relationship with our state crime lab, and I work with them very closely because they are the experts on the forensics. In the past, I used to just submit items that I thought would be the right thing to submit, but I realized real fast that I'm not the expert in that field, so I reached out to the experts. So I actually meet with a couple of forensic scientists a couple of times a year, and we review about half of the cases each time and go over items that either have been tested or not tested, some items that have been tested depending on how long ago. The technology is constantly improving, so they may say, hey, I know we did this 10 years ago, but let's give it another shot today. We're using a different technique that today you may get some type of answer where 10 years ago we had no answers. So that's the difference for me as far as approaching these, is working, really trying to be collaborative with the agencies that I'm working with, and letting their expertise come in to work with me as well.
Great. Aubrey, I'll have you start with this one. How do you balance investigative process with emotional realities for victims, or survivors in this case, when a case is reopened?
So, I already touched on the setting expectations. I don't try to be pessimistic, but I try to be, realistic. And I'll give, potentials and what ifs, and kind of try to give them an idea of what they can expect in different ways that things may happen. So basically giving them more of an overview of the possibilities rather than it's going to happen like this. Ask the question again. I feel like I missed a piece.
Oh, sure. How do you balance investigative process with the emotional realities for victims' families?
Yes. The other piece is staying in contact with the investigators, making sure they're all kind of on the same page, because nothing makes you feel worse than coming into a situation, talking to a client, and they're like, well, what about what the detective said about this? Like, you need to know what's going on, and so having an open communication with the investigative team and the parties on the case is super essential.
It sounds like there's an element in your work that is kind of decoding that process for
Yes.
them. Yeah. What about you, Detective Pinder?
So what I would say to that is I've actually really had some challenges and a lot of questions even for myself over the years with working with families. And the reason why is there are some families that really want to stay updated on what's going on, even if it's anything. Even if it's just, hey, we conducted one interview this last month, they want to know that. But then I've also encountered other families that don't want to hear about it. They don't want to hear about it, even if it's solved. And I actually had a family from back in the 70s that I solved a case from back in the 70s, and I reached out to the family, and the only two survivors were his two children, but they actually were really upset with me about it. They had already put this well behind them, and they said, you have just totally ripped this scab off for us. And even though the suspects were dead and they weren't going to ever have to go to court on this, they were still really upset about it. So it's always a challenge on the best way to deal with this. I recently had a case that I made an arrest on, and I had two family members there. So I had a sister and an aunt of the victim. And I asked them, I said, I run into this challenge where some families want information and other families don't want information. And I said, what are your thoughts on that? So the sister said, I don't like the phone calls because every time you call, I think you're going to give me good news, and it's never good news. And the aunt said, I love your calls. I want you to call all the time. So it's really been a challenge. So what I did is, the way to evolve into this, to kind of deal with this, is I created what's called a Hope Conference. And we host a Hope Conference every 2 years for our victim families of our homicides and our missing persons. And we bring in a number of different resources. And what I mean by that is the district attorney's office usually will have somebody there. The state crime lab, will have somebody there. And I usually will have a victim's family member speak as well. And then our administration. And the idea behind that is just to talk about kind of what we're talking about here today, is some of the different challenges and some of the different things that you may see and why it's taking long and why, these cases sometimes don't get solved. So we do have that helps. And then to be included in that, I also have a pre-designated, appointment availabilities, to where we will meet with the families individually at a later time and discuss their particular case if they have interest in that. And then that way it kind of opens the door to them to say, hey, we'll meet with you if you want to, but if you don't, we're not going to call and hound you to come in here and talk to us if that's something you're not interested in doing.
It's a great reflection of meeting people where they are. Yeah. I want to get into a little bit of myth busting because I think there can be a lot of hyperbole around this subject. And so I would say if you could talk about, and feel free, you can expand on this as much as you want, what misconceptions do people have about this field or this work because of television or media that you've seen that you'd like to address?
Yeah, I just think when we see the TV, there are some programs and some series, I suppose, that have some similarities to maybe what we do. However, probably the biggest challenge I run into is with DNA. So I do have some DNA in a number of cases, but keep in mind, back in the 70s and 80s, times were different. DNA really wasn't a thing till the mid-80s, and the way things were collected at the time may not be ideal. The way they were packaged at the time may not be ideal. So it gives us a lot of challenges, meaning that sometimes if there is DNA, it's very degraded DNA. So currently, in some of those cases, we can't use that DNA. So I think it frustrates a lot of families because they either see on the news all these cases getting solved with DNA or on the TV programs, and in their mind, there's just no reason why their case isn't getting solved either. So that's a challenge. The other challenge we run into is with DNA, it becomes sometimes we have profiles that are mixed, and they are now to the point where they can start extracting out 1 and 2, maybe 3. But if it's really mixed, like there's a number of contributors to that item of evidence that we're getting DNA from, they may not be able to exclude each one of those to try to determine who our subject is. So again, I believe that becomes frustrating for families as well. So yeah, I mean, I think the way it's put out there is, I mean, the cold case is a hot topic, I think, for a lot of people. A lot of people are really interested in cold cases, but it's really a lot of reading, a lot of chasing people down, interviewing, a lot of waiting, and a lot of patience is really the reality of cold cases.
What about misconceptions in your work, Aubrey?
Myth busting. My biggest pet peeve on any TV show ever is that you can't report somebody missing within the first 24 hours. If they're an adult and they're missing, please report it immediately. If there's something suspicious, if there's something that just feels off, report it. Don't wait for 24 hours because that's not a rule. That's a Hollywood rule. That's not actual life. So that's my biggest pet peeve and something that I tell everybody. If something feels off, report it. If somebody goes missing, somebody's not where they're supposed to be. The best way I think to prevent a case from going cold is to get somebody looking into it as soon as possible.
And that kind of brings me back to another question that we had, and we can start with you, Aubrey, if that's okay. It's, from your perspective, what role does advocacy play in this work?
So I think it's huge. Advocacy is huge. It's gonna determine how people experience and process their trauma. You don't want just the lay person to be an expert in homicide or in these horrible, awful crimes that they're waiting to be solved. So having an advocate is so important. Somebody that you can trust to give you the information. I've got a client who is currently so pissed at everybody. She's mad at the first responder, she's mad at the detective team, she's mad at her prosecutor, she's mad at her victim advocate, and she's mad at me, honestly, because why not? But just coming and saying, listen, you can be mad at everybody. That is totally justified. Your son was murdered, and you can be mad at the world. That's fine. But I am here to help connect some of these dots and to be this person that can take this anger and that can make sure and express your frustrations to the proper people in a proper way. And I think the only way that she can express that to me is because I do make her feel comfortable as an advocate and can allow her that peace of mind and that presence where she can just word vomit all her frustrations and I can kind of direct it where it needs to go.
It's important.
Yeah, I think advocacy is extremely important, and really, I I guess I believe I advocate for the victims, but I really try to stay more focused on the cases. And there is usually some type of an advocate that I find within, whether it be within the family or it's a family friend, that they may feel more comfortable working with for whatever reason it may be. But I too, I have families. I have a couple of families that are furious with me, and and the thing that's kind of interesting to me, it's the cases that I've done the most on. They're the families that are the most upset with me. The ones that I probably haven't, just because there's not a lot to do in certain ones, those families are elated with me, but the ones that I've done the most on sometimes are super furious with me. And I understand, and I understand where they're coming from. These are old cases, and I recognize that they want them solved, as do I. We all want them solved. But sometimes if we don't have anything that we've already exhausted everything for right now, we may have to look at something a little bit later to see if we can help them. But I recognize, and I try to be empathetic towards their frustration. But again, I'm really doing everything I possibly can to help them. And sometimes they don't see it that way, but I just try to just keep moving forward. And I'm not going to give up on the case, and I let them know that. But I know that usually doesn't take their frustration away. And I haven't been in their shoes, so I don't know what they're feeling. But I can only imagine that they're super frustrated, especially these really old cases.
Thank you. I want to move on to a career advice question. And that is, if you were a student today, how would you prepare differently?
Go ahead.
Well, I would probably say, keep an open mind when it comes to what you're thinking maybe you have interest in. And I tell this story because it happened to me. I spent 10 years in traffic and investigated accidents, fatalities, and those types of things. I had the opportunity to ride motorcycle, Harley Davidson for 10 years and get paid for it. It was a wonderful opportunity. But after about 10 years of that, I wanted to change, and I had an opportunity to go to our DEA task force, and we participate with them. So I was able to go with them or work with them, grow my hair out, not shave, wear shorts and a t-shirt to work. It was awesome. So about 2 years into that, I was just really kind of picking things up in that task force, and I was approached by our homicide sergeant that informed me that they wanted to have a detective start working our cold cases. And but the only way that the current sheriff at the time would allow is if they took somebody else from another area into investigations and brought him into homicide. Well, I've never had interest in homicide, and I actually told him no. I said, I am not interested in this. And he said, it would only be for 6 months. And I said, I'm just not interested. I've never thought of homicide. Working those cases have just never appealed to me. But he gave me his word that if I would do it for 6 months, he'd let me go back to DEA. And at the time, DEA was on like a 5-year assignment. And he gave me his word that he would make it like a 6-year assignment for me, so I'd get extra time up there for doing him a favor. So I said, I'll do it for 6 months, but after 6 months, I'm out. He said, that's fine, you're out after 6 months. So 6 months rolled around, and I begged him to stay. I loved it. I had no idea that it was going to be for me. And it's kind of similar with the cold case. When I moved over there just over 10 years ago, the detective that was working at Promoted asked me if I wanted to do cold cases. I had done a little bit with the cold cases, just on a grant that we had. And I really wasn't super excited about it, but I thought, well, I'll give it a try. And again, it's turned out to be the best move that I've ever made for myself. So I guess my point is this, and that is try to keep an open mind. I know a lot of times people really have their mind on, this is what I want to do, I'm going to do this, and another opportunity may appear, and you may want to take a look at it, or at least give it a shot. Because like I said, for me, if that supervisor really kind of wouldn't have pushed me into homicide, I wouldn't be here today. And so I give him a lot of credit for that. The other thing I would say in this line of work, with homicide and cold cases, it's really a lot of self-motivation. I could technically, I guess, go to work and sit there. Somebody probably wouldn't know I wasn't doing anything for probably months. So you really have to be self-motivated. There's nobody necessarily always looking over your shoulder. You kind of have to set up how you're going to do things and when and how those things are going to occur and try to make the best of your time that you can with that. But I would really just, encourage you to be, if it's a field you want to be in, be self-motivated. And probably the biggest thing I've learned is patience. I've had to learn patience because I've had and do have cases that are like super, super close to getting resolved, but it's a lot of no's and a lot of no's and a lot of no's before I get a maybe. And then I really get lucky when I get a yes. So just be aware of that as well. But that would be my advice, whatever that meaning class or degree or whatever you may be looking at, you may have found most families, once you sit down and explain it to them, the importance of it. I haven't had a family that's given me any issues with that. They understood, but the key is communication, right? We got to communicate with these families. We got to try to give them the information so that they don't end up in a spot like that where they're frustrated and wondering why they couldn't have had maybe that open casket if that's what they chose to do.
I think there's also a level of cultural understanding there. I mean, obviously, the evidence collection and the investigation is first and foremost, but understanding why people feel the way they do, upon a death and taking that into consideration with how you approach it is super important. And just having general cultural awareness, like in the Middle Eastern cultures, you have to bury a loved one within 24 hours. So understanding that, okay, this is going to be something that might be extra triggering.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. So I was just wondering, how does time kind of affect the detective work? Like, what really changes the most compared to like when you're like solving crimes that were committed like a week ago versus like 10 years ago? Because I'm sure like in addition to DNA, yeah.
Well, a lot of things change. Like I said before, you may have witnesses that have passed away or they've moved out of state. It just makes things a lot more challenging. We don't have the cameras and the doorbell rings. We don't have that stuff today, or back then like we do today. The other thing is, when we get we kind of refer to it sometimes like as a current case. With a current case, one of the things that I think a lot of agencies or at least a lot of the conferences that I've been to pertaining to this is they always tell the agencies, if you have a case today, you better pay now or you'll pay a lot more later. And it really is true, because you get a current case and maybe an agency doesn't want to pay a bunch of overtime, or they don't want to spend an extra money for some additional testing. And I'm a big advocate to say, you better pay it up front, because if you don't, you'll pay a lot more later. And I've seen that in the cases that I've investigated, because again, when I have people that are in 5 different states, I've got to travel to 5 different states to go and interview those people, right? So it takes some coordination, it takes funding to be able to do that, or now we need to send stuff to a lab where maybe initially that could have been taken care of, like today, it's a lot easier to deal with that. So there's just a lot of challenges with even investigators passing, the crime scene or forensics passing away after so many years or not remembering the case. And that's probably the biggest challenges that we have, is trying to go back and they're difficult cases, right? I always say, cold cases they're difficult because if they weren't, they would have already been solved. Mm-hmm. So they're extremely difficult to begin with, but now you add another 10 or 20 years onto it, it even makes it that much more difficult. So it does require a lot more resources, I believe, today, and a lot more partnerships today than it probably does if something was to happen today. Today's pretty streamlined for the most part, not that there's never a whodunit, because there is, but there's a lot more technology out there, like with the phones, and they're able to track people with phones and different devices. And I don't know if you've followed the Savannah Guthrie, her mother's case. They've been working like with her pacemaker. I mean, there's just a lot of different things today that we'd never be able to do in the 70s or 80s. And that's the difference, is so much better with technology versus back then.
So would you say that like most of your kind of investigative work is mostly through interviews then? Like you're mentioning visiting multiple states.
And then also kind of attached to that, do you tend to kind of focus on one at a time so that like all the details are able to connect, or do you focus on multiple just because you've got so many?
Yeah, it's a good question. So as far as the cases go, we have, at the sheriff's office, we have 36 unsolved cases of homicide, and we have 15 missing person cases, which we suspect there's foul play involved in them as well. And, you know, I will say that a lot of again, trainings and conferences I've been to over the years, they really try to tell you to focus on 2 or 3 cases at a time. I have not been successful at that. I juggle most of them at the time. And the reason I do is, and it's hard, but the reason I do is, for example, if I take something out to the lab to get tested, I may need to pause that case for a little bit. It may take a few weeks or a couple of months to get all the results back. So I may pause that case. So if I work in that case, that one's paused. I work on another case, that goes to the state crime lab, that's paused, and then what am I gonna do? So I've really struggled with that over my career. So I just keep picking up cases and keep working them. And then if I have to put that case down because this one comes back and have to finish what I was doing on that case, I will do that as well. And that's what I do. I do a lot of, unfortunately, juggling around a little bit, but it just seems, I have a hard time being idle, so I can't just sit there and wait. I feel like I've got to do something. Tell me the first part of your question. I think
It was mostly just like, do you think that like the evidence that you're kind of collecting is mostly through like interviews as opposed to like tangible?
So it's kind of both, interviews and evidence. That's kind of the 2 things I'm looking at. Depending on the case, I may want to get evidence first, and the reason I may want to is I have some cases that I do have one person to interview, but I got one shot. So I may go try to interview that person, and they may say, I'm not interested in talking to you, and then I'm kind of stuck, right? So I'm always trying to get as much advantage as I can get. So if I can test evidence and maybe find their DNA or their fingerprint or something on there, that may help me then when I go interview that person. Because if I go interview them and say, well, I know your fingerprint was on the knife, and they never touched the knife, and they say, no, it wasn't, they know more than I do. So I want to know more than they do pertaining to the evidence before I interview them. So it's kind of that kind of is usually how I try to work things when I'm going to interview maybe a suspect. Now, if it's other witnesses, I can do that, at just kind of as I'm moving along with the case.
And then my last question is more for you. How do you find that like trauma and then like the processing of that trauma kind of affects their involvement within the case? Like, do you find that like people are like really invested in it when they're like first kind of suffering from like the loss of a loved one, but then as time passes, do they kind of process that trauma and move on, or do they stay more invested in it?
That's definitely person specific. And as the detective noticed, there's some people that don't want anything to do with it, and there's some that want every little update that you can provide. So it really is just listening to the families and understanding where they're coming from and what their hopes are for an outcome, and then keeping them, as close to that understanding as you can. So whether they want updates or don't want updates, it's definitely not one way.
I'd like to extend part of your question back to Aubrey as well, which is how many cases are you holding at a time and managing those moving parts?
So I have currently 74 cases active. They're not all criminal cases. So at my office, I am the criminal attorney, so I do advocate for them within the criminal case. I work kind of hand in hand generally with the prosecutors and be kind of that middleman. The prosecution is first and foremost aligned with the interests of the state, and the secondary the victim. So I am primary the victim, so I kind of help assert some of their rights and issues if the prosecution is differing, basically. That's what I do with the criminal stuff. But then we also have so many other cases that are tangentially related to the homicide. So I got a client divorced because her husband killed her daughter. I've performed adoptions where the dad killed the mom, and then so the grandma wanted to adopt the kids. We do a lot of probate stuff. So Slayer statute, if you kill somebody that you're set to inherit from, you can't inherit from them. So we have a lot of different, lots of civil stuff. I try to get property back from people. Really, it's so versatile and it's so wide that there definitely, you can't just focus on one thing, and there's a lot of different things that come into play, and it's no 2 days are the same.
It's a lot of interesting complexity there for sure. I think we have time for one more question. Okay.
You mentioned that human error is pretty inevitable when it comes to anything. So what are some errors that you've seen by either yourself or colleagues that proved to be detrimental to cases that we can learn from?
I mean, investigatory. You have a response to that?
Yeah,
That's a tough
it is
question
a
to
tough
end
question,
on.
but I'll do my best. Yeah, I mean, there are things that maybe could have been tested sooner that didn't get tested sooner for whatever reason. It may be lack of communication with your lab or something like that, knowing that they could have maybe tested that item. It could be, it's important to really know who you're going to go interview, if you're going to go interview a witness or a suspect in a case. And if you just go ill-prepared, right, you're maybe not going to be able to ask all the questions because you get back to the office, then you'll think, well, I should have asked these 5 different questions, and I didn't because you weren't prepared. So those are the things and challenges that sometimes I would say that would happen. Maybe lack of communication with the family, depending on the family you're wanting to interview. Not interview, but that you're working with, the victim's family. And like I said, some want that communication, some don't, and I've struggled with that, and that's one of the reasons we created this Hope Conference and I still have people calling me, and I give my cards out and say, if you have questions, call me. But, if I spend all day calling families and talking to them, I'm not going to have any time to work the cases. So it's kind of that balancing act as well, I want to hear from them, and I want to try to help them, but I also really need some time to work cases. And if I don't have that time and just talking to people, then, something has to idle. So, like I said, I appreciate the calls, but the Hope Conference has been a huge help to me because it's one day of a lot of information, and the ones that want to sign up for anything additional, they can, and we always get a number of that do that. And it works out nice for us because then we can really, within a month, we talk to all the families that want to visit with us and talk about their cases, and we can do that. But a big key is that communication too with the families. Probably the other thing that can be a problem sometimes as well, and that is we find that families, or even outside of the family, people want the cases. They want the entire case file. And we don't give out the case file. And even though it's a 50-year-old case, it's still an open case. And that frustrates a lot of people throughout the community and families. It's a challenge that we run into, but they want the entire case. And my response to that is, if we give you the entire case, even a family member, we then have to give it to everybody. We can't pick and choose and say, well, we're just going to give it to this person and nobody else gets it. The only time we can give information out like that is if we're utilizing some type of a profession that's going to help us get that case out or help us progress that case along. Then we can. There's some exceptions, but just to hand it over to a family, it's very problematic for us because then it's open to everybody. And then if we do find somebody down the road and want to charge them, these cases already are extremely difficult to charge, period. Now you have the case out in the public, it's almost impossible then to charge. So you almost have to tell the family, if I give it to you, just understand that if we figure out who did this, we could probably never prosecute them because it's going to be very problematic. Yeah. But most of the time, I'd say a majority of the families understand or are good with it. But I do think there's some outside sources sometimes that want to write books and exploit the case, and we fight that.
My response to that question when they ask if they have the case file is no, because then that would make you a witness and you would have to testify, and then what expert knowledge do you have to offer the case? Then that would jeopardize the integrity of the case. That's definitely an issue we come across too. I would also expand on the communication point. I think if a mistake is made, own up to it. Set the tone for what happened. For instance, I have a case where a paramedic disassembled a murder weapon, and that's obviously something that is very not standard for investigation. And so it's more important to tell the family, hey, this happened and this is what we're doing about it, rather than let them see in court or in the news or somewhere else that this happened, because then they're going to come down at you. You'll have lost all trust with them. So I don't know the mistakes are inevitable, but which I think is the word that you used. I'd say they're likely, and just owning it and setting the tone. Like, we are so sorry that this happened. This is what we're doing about it.
So I want to wrap up this by saying I love how respectfully and delicately you can talk about the intricacies of this type of work and the real life things that you're talking about. It's a lot to navigate, so I appreciate you sharing this with us. And also, Aubrey, what you just said about communication, I just want to extend that thought, regardless of what line of work you're going into, being open and honest and taking ownership and being upfront is a skill that will take you far in life and in the workforce, whether it's working with the public and working with survivors or any position. I want to take a minute to acknowledge Hinckley Institute, Nick and Rory. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much to our guests, Detective Pinder and Aubrey Davis, for being here.
Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.